Salzburg in northern Austria is Mozart's birthplace. Filled with a rich artistic atmosphere and adorned with numerous magnificent buildings, it draws tourists from all over the world. This is the oldest salt mine in Europe, nestled beneath Dürnberg Mountain. Thousands of years ago, miners glided down the wooden slide and descended to the bottom. They extracted salt rocks, boiled and processed it into salt slabs. Unless one has personally ventured into this underground labyrinth, it's difficult to fathom the enormity of constructing such a subterranean city in pursuit of salt. Today, at a depth of 1,500 meters underground, stand two wooden signs. The left one represents Salzburg, indicating Austria's ownership of salt mines on the left, and the right one represents Bavaria, indicating Germany's ownership of salt mines on the right. This salt mine mountain straddles the German-Austrian border. The sign looks ordinary, but it embodies a hard-fought peace, since it's the underground German-Austrian border. The old gentleman approaching us is 70 years old. He is a volunteer at the salt mine.
Mein Name ist Hans Scharteiner. Ich bin hier geboren und habe hier im Salzbergbau Dürnberg 40 Jahre lang gearbeitet. Zurzeit bin ich Pensionist. Ich betreibe eine Landwirtschaft, das heißt, ich habe eine Kuh und eine Ziege, die ich versorgen muss. Und ich beschäftige mich auch natürlich mit der Vergangenheit dieses Bergbaues und mit der Historie. Lower more.
The young man holding a flashlight is conducting routine checks before getting off work. He teaches math and PE at a high school, but is keen on the salt mine's history.
Let's keep walking.
Mein Name ist Michael Neupertl, ich bin hier stellvertretende Museumsleitung mittlerweile. Ich mache Führungen zusätzlich, bin jetzt seit 15 Jahren hier tätig, also schon seit 2000. Und es ist sehr schön hier zu arbeiten, vor allem gerade als Bad Reichenhaller, weil man hier eben geboren ist und mit dem Ganzen hier groß geworden ist. Das heißt, es ist eine innere Verbindung eigentlich zur alten Sardine da, weil das Herzstück von Bad Reichenhall eigentlich mit ist, um das Ganze herum entstanden ist.
Interestingly enough, Tons, 70, and Michel, 30, as tour guides in the same salt mine, have never met, because one is in Austria and the other Germany.
Die Sardinenkonvention beruht aus dem Jahre 1829, denn die Erzbischöfe zwischen Salzburg und die Fürstpröpste von Berchtesgaden.
Now they collaborate to introduce different sections of the salt mine to tourists. However, thousands of years ago, they would be enemies on the battlefield.
Auch die Kelten haben solche Steine abgebaut und in den Handel gebracht.
As the largest salt mine in Europe, Dürnberg Mountain witnessed the confrontation between Germany and Austria. From the end of the 16th century, Wolf Dietrich von Reithenau, Prince Archbishop of Salzburg, Austria, had the salt mined and transported through the Salzach River. The wealth accumulated created one of the most beautiful cities in Europe at that time. However, salt brought wealth and war. Horizontal drilling was adopted in the Durenberg salt mine, similar to that in coal mines. Judging from the mine mouth, Salzburg miners had probably already crossed the border to steal salt from Bavaria. With increasing salt output, Austrians monopolized the market with cheap salt to compete with Germans. Austrians also blocked the Salzach River, cutting off the only route Germans must pass to transport salt. Germany was furious. Germany decided to fight back. Its troops campaigned in Salzburg, triggered by salt. A century-long war over the control of mineral resources broke out. In the war, Salzburg suffered a disastrous defeat. The archbishop was imprisoned in a castle. "200 years later, Germany-Austria relations improved. In addition to the boundary on the ground, that under the ground was delineated. A series of treaties were drafted, defining various boundaries and reciprocal deals for underground salt mining. Say, Salzburg could extract salt in Bavaria, but must buy wood from Bavaria as fuel for salt production. Finally, the battle over salt was over. The salt mine has been converted into a museum to demonstrate the past glory of the two cities. Tons is now retired, but likes descending to the bottom and taking a look around.
Waren Sie schon mit dem Zug gefahren?
Tausende Mal. Tausende. Ja, ja.
The two wooden signs demarcating the border seem to be a reminder that the Salt War should never be forgotten. For him, born and raised here, these stories have been integrated into his life. Salt disputes caused border disputes and changed territorial boundaries. Salt embodies the evolution and clash of civilizations and encapsulates a magnificent history. Salt disputes erupted all over the world, constantly reshaping boundaries on the map. Situated on the northwest frontier of the northern Song, the vassal state of the Xia produced greenish-white salt. Compared with Xie salt in the northern Song, it was sweet and cheap. Therefore, much greenish-white salt was smuggled into the northern Song, marginalizing the expensive Xie salt controlled by the northern Song government. Despite repeated prohibitions, smuggling continued. The Xia acquired enormous wealth. The northern Song adopted a basic strategy of banning greenish-white salt, blocking salt imports from the Xia. The northern Song tried to cut off the Xia's income source. War was imminent. Back then, the Xia relied on wealth accumulated from greenish-white salt. It boasted a heavy armored cavalry unit nicknamed Iron Harrier, and a bow of a range far exceeding that of any other kinds. Also, the Tangut people in the Xia were born and raised in the desert wilderness since childhood. From the very beginning, the northern Song was at a disadvantage. The 5 armies of the northern Song, the lack of provisions and fodder, steadily lost ground, with their death toll reaching nearly 400,000. Over the next 2 years, the northern Song suffered repeated defeats, losing control over northwest China. The northern Song had to compromise with the Xia. However, continuous salt trade sanctions also greatly weakened the Xia. Neither side could afford to engage in wars again, so the contest shifted to negotiations. With salt remaining the central issue, the Xia proposed ceasefire conditions, specifically demanding the lifting of the salt ban and the export of large quantities of salt every year. This was unacceptable to the northern Song. One winter's day in 1044, the ancient city of Chengchuan, on the border of the Xia, appeared more heavily guarded than usual. The northern Song dispatched envoys for negotiations. The enfeoffment letter from the northern Song set out give and take conditions, including an annual provision of bountiful silver and goods to the Xia. It also suggested granting the head of the Tangut people the title Lord of the Xia, but did not mention lifting the salt ban. In the frontier meeting hall, the northern Song's envoys anxiously awaited the head of the Tangut, but only 3 minor officials came and arrogantly took away the enfeoffment letter. Obviously, the Xia was extremely dissatisfied with the peace agreement that did not address the salt ban. The war over salt did not end with a clear winner. The northern Song lost the war, and the Xia lost the opportunity to lift the salt ban. The war did not break the trade barriers established by salt. The northern Song and the Xia, once the suzerain and the vassal states for salt, went to war and became enemies. Salt changed the boundaries of trade between nations. Some sought to obtain salt from afar. Some sought to sell salt further afield. This simplest of human economic activities triggered conflicts throughout history. Cheshire, England, is blessed with a unique combination of dairy resources and salt mines. It produces large quantities of high-quality cheese. Therefore, Cheshire is also known as Britain's earliest cheese-producing area. In late August, at the Bourne's Cheshire Cheese, the workers go on vacation. But cows do not take vacations. Mr. Bourne, the owner, and his two sons do most of the work on the farm. Whenever Bourne has time, he will come to the factory to make cheese in the most traditional way. This has become an integral part of his life.
The quality of the cheese is certainly different. Of course, I think it's much better. The reason that I'm still making cheese today when most other farms have stopped is that I just have a passion for quality cheese. It's about passion. There has to be some passion involved.
Bourne's Cheshire cheese is one of the most famous local cheese producers. His family have been making cheese since 1700 and passing down the craftsmanship from generation to generation. Even today, they still adhere to the most traditional cheese-making craftsmanship in Cheshire. Salt plays a crucial role in cheese making. Although sea salt makes good cheese too, it never rivals the mellowness and sweetness of Cheshire salt.
And I will show you how I do it. That is salt, Cheshire salt here. I take a cheese like that, yeah, into the salt, like that.
Cheshire salt is obtained from the brine in salt mines, boiling the brine in large iron pans. Before the invention of refrigeration equipment, in order to preserve cheese for a long time, 10 pounds of cheese needed 1 pound of salt.
Salt has a number of parts to play in quality cheese. The first is that it acts as an initial preservative. When the cheese-making process is finished, before the bacteria fully develop and before they fully develop the acid levels, the inclusion of salt will do two things. It'll stop the development of some harmful bacteria. It will also slow down the acid development within the cheese, which is very important. And not least, it adds to flavour. It's very important for flavour because salt added to anything will bring the flavours out.
A small piece of cheese cannot be made without salt. It demonstrates the ubiquity and importance of salt in human cuisine. Humble, yet important. The tiny salt, throughout British history, accompanied sailors on their voyages, crossed different borders, and proved the catalyst for wars. At the beginning of the 17th century, Britain began its global colonial expansion, with British expeditionary forces in the West Indies, North America, and India. In the spring of 1840, a British expeditionary force, consisting of 48 warships and 4,000 soldiers, set off from the British colony of India for ancient and mysterious China. Salt was an essential provision. These soldiers were not lonely during the long march. They had plenty of fun. Dedicated compartments were allocated in the warships to store salt and cure food. Soldiers were provided with large salt packs. The local expeditionary force was largely supplied locally. During sailing, soldiers might be doing an important job half the time. To preserve the fresh meat obtained during the journey with salt for long-term consumption. There was no canned food back then. The food carried by the expeditionary force to China, apart from ham and bacon, also included cheese. In the early years of colonial expansion, salt existed as ballast and as a preservative. In this colonial war, China was defeated. With warships loaded with cured food and artillery, Britain forced China to open its door to trade. Apart from opium, Britain also dumped industrial products like salt. At that time, under the rule of the Qing government, salt tax accounted for half the fiscal revenue. Opening up the salt trade was essentially giving away the economic lifeline. From 1840 to 1913, the then Chinese government ultimately failed to hold onto the last straw. Britain grabbed control of the salt industry. The British Empire, the empire on which the sun never set, seemed to never forget expanding the salt industry while expanding its colonial territory. Salt represented colonization and power. Today, the Bourne family still uses the best salt to make top-quality cheese. The colonial expansion may have ended, but the salty flavors remain. In Europe, salt broke through the traditional national boundaries with ships and guns of colonialism, triggered a series of colonial and anti-colonial wars, and changed the world's landscape. Heading to the north of Gujarat, India, a vast desert will appear and the natural environment will deteriorate. In this desert, salt flats emerge. The Jibu family has lived here for generations. Relying on the underground brine and the intense sunlight, they produce white, coarse salt. Today is harvest day. Extracting salt in the desert, although the conditions are very harsh, they can trade salt freely. For a small annual rent to the local government, Jibu and his descendants can extract salt from this 10,000 square meters of salt flats. The income from salt production guarantees a certain level of existence for the Jibu family. On the edge of this sparsely populated desert, there are still some nomadic tribes. The men do odd jobs. The women and the children make ethnic handicrafts and sell to tourists. They belong to the lowest classes in India, constantly moving and of no fixed abode. In the makeshift home, the mother cooks for the children on a crude stove. Even for the simplest roti, she adds plenty of salt to season the dough. Indians today, regardless of class and religion, can all enjoy this condiment as they like. However, 100 years ago, for the vast majority, even a morsel of salt was a luxury. India enjoys a long coastline and produces pure and cheap sea salt, highly popular in overseas markets. In the early 19th century, Britain colonized India. In order to protect the monopoly of the British salt on overseas markets, the British government adopted unfair competition, prohibiting the overseas sale of Indian salt through enacting laws and increasing taxation. No one except the British government could possess salt.
So the British actually, they thought of constructing a wall like the Great Wall of China. That wall never got built, right? But what the British did was to plant. They did a vegetative wall. They planted what is called a thicket or a hedge, which was a very thick bush of trees, cacti with thorns, so you could not pass through that. Right? So their idea was that nobody should pass from Western India to Eastern India with salt unless they passed through where there were gaps in this wall which were manned by government people.
Salt, in India, because of one man, symbolized national sovereignty. Also because of this man, over 100 years ago, during the years of resistance against British rule, everyone was entitled to salt making. This man is, of course, Gandhi. In 1930, from Sabarmati Ashram in Gujarat, Gandhi, 61, and 78 chosen followers set out to trek to Dandi, a town on the Arabian Sea. There, they would flout British law by scraping sea salt. This is a famous independence movement in history, also known as the Salt March. Initially, Gandhi's choice of salt as protest focus was met with incredulity. Gandhi told them that it was the most suitable way to resist British tyranny, as everyone needs salt and it affects all the Indians.
So before he actually begins to think of this march, Gandhi has practiced living on a saltless diet for a very long period. So he knows what the absence of salt could actually mean.
To eliminate unequal colonial trade competition, after a long 25-day journey, Gandhi reached Dandi, accompanied not only by the initial 78 followers, but tens of thousands. Embracing the first rays of dawn, Gandhi's slender body cautiously stepped onto the salt-covered beach. He bent down and picked up a large salt chunk. Although walking barefoot on the coarse salt brought discomfort, this discomfort brought a sense of freedom. The British salt law was violated for the first time.
What nature gives me, nobody can control, nobody can have a monopoly over. So it's also a view about who has access and who has control and rights over natural resources. And of course, the natural resources belong to people and not necessarily and not in every sense to a government.
In 1931, the British Viceroy held talks with Gandhi to end the Salt March. This was the first dialogue between India and Britain as equals. Today, Indians living by the sea can collect salt for their own use. During the Raj, salt was endowed with an unprecedented significance, symbolizing national sovereignty, and got involved in the anti-colonial cause. Salt, along with colonialism, broke the national boundaries and told stories of the desperate struggle between oppression and resistance, justice and injustice. When we turn our attention to America, salt also determined the political landscape and trend of a country. City, the capital of Utah, US, there lies the Great Salt Lake, the largest inland salt lake in North America. It is not far from the crowd, like an ocean at the doorstep of a metropolis. Like other famous salt lakes in the world, the scenery is unique and desolate. The water is as blue as the sea, glittering in the scorching sun. The western part of the Great Salt Lake are dazzling white salt flats that have dried up. The 1.5-meter thick salt crust covers an area of 100 square kilometers, as smooth and hard as concrete. This is a natural speedway, also an excellent place for all kinds of competitive events. The land speed record of over 1,000 kilometers per hour was set here. So vast, it is the feeling shared by all the visitors. Salt today is no longer scarce. However, in the past, salt was scarce. As a vital resource, it even determined the outcome of a war. In 1861, war in the US broke out. It was known as the American Civil War. However, nobody knows that this war was also connected to salt. War broke out on April 12, 1861. 4 days later, President Abraham Lincoln ordered a blockade of all southern ports. This blockade was forcefully implemented. Back then, the North was an important source of salt, exporting a considerable amount to the South. This plunged the South into a salt crisis. The third year into the war, the blockade intensified. The Union troops occupied and destroyed salt works, and the Navy also attacked salt production sites of the Confederacy along the coast. If salt works had brine wells, they would destroy pumps. The Confederacy troops suffered salt shortages. Morale was low. The North slowly gathered momentum. When salt began to be scarce in the South, the owners of those large plantations on the coast recalled their method in the War of Independence. They sent slaves to fetch seawater and boiled it in large pots. But soon, the blockade and the war intensified more than anticipated. Salt produced in this way did not help much. Some smart people went to a former cured meat factory to dig soil, filter it with water, and steam it, just to get a pinch of salt. They cured meat again with this salt. The meat looked as if it had been rolled in mud. A Confederacy officer complained in his diary. In the eyes of those distant politicians, the president seemed to be a good nation builder. But seemingly, he didn't consider how to solve the salt issue. He just abandoned many salt works. These production facilities can produce 7,000 bushels of salt per day, enough to sustain an army of 50,000. What a bountiful supply! The shortage caused severe economic problems. When the war broke out, a 200-pound bag of salt cost 50 cents. A year after the blockade, the price rose to $6. And in the third year, it soared past $25. In the early stages of the war, the Confederacy troops had a ration list. According to the rules, each soldier got 10 pounds of bacon, 26 pounds of coarse food grain, 7 pounds of flour or hardtack, 3 pounds of rice, 1.5 pounds of salt and seasonal vegetables. But in fact, the Confederacy ration list was hard to deliver. Salt was scarce. Other food was not available either. A side without salt supply could not win the war. On April 9, 1865, the South surrendered. During the negotiations, the Confederacy general confessed that his troops had been starving for days and asked for food. It is said that, when the Union supply wagons appeared, the starving Confederacy soldiers cheered. The Union in the North won the war. Few people realized that the struggle for salt played a pivotal role in the American Civil War. Salt united a once divided country. From human perspectives, the Great Salt Lake, a vast expanse of misty, rolling waters, lies silent. In Zhejiang, Sichuan, China, a midsummer morning before 8 a.m., at the entrance of the Shenhai salt well, people wait in line to buy salt. Handmade coarse salt is available here in limited quantities every day, 10 bags per person. For many Zhejiang people, coarse salt from the Shenhai salt well is the best match for Sichuan pickles, for the sour, crisp and authentic taste. It is worth getting up early and waiting in a line. Sichuan's passion for pickles is unparalleled. Especially during summer, when one does not have a good appetite, prepare a jar of pickle water and one can enjoy appetizing and refreshing pickles the next day. In Aunt Yo's view, making pickles is easy. Almost all kinds of vegetables can be used. Radishes, red peppers, lettuce, young ginger. A proper color combination can increase one's appetite. In the boiled water, put dried Sichuan pepper, aniseed, and Zhejiang coarse salt, already partially successful. Fresh ingredients are put into the jar, like a diver jumping into the water, so this is also called diving pickles. Keep the sealed pickle jar in the shade, and the pickles can be consumed a day later. Zhejiang's coarse salt is moderately salty. After mild dehydration and under the action of lactic acid, the vegetables become sour, salty, appetizing, crisp, and palatable. With some chili oil added, the pickles serve as the best dish to go with rice. Today, Zhejiang people can enjoy the delicacies seasoned with salt as they like. Behind the food, in addition to the sour and refreshing taste of pickles, there is a feeling, because in Zhejiang, which is rarely known, salt was connected with war. In the Zhejiang Salt Museum, many precious black and white photos are exhibited, recording salt production back then. Sun Mingjing took the photos. The bamboo pipes were stretching like roller coasters. The derricks were densely packed. The ships for salt transportation were moored at the pier. The naked brine coolies were sweating heavily. In April 1938, this young university teacher came to Zhejiang alone with a camera. In the midst of war, he documented the years of struggle in the Zhejiang salt industry. In 1938, during the War of Resistance against Japanese aggression, the main salt production areas in China were occupied in succession. Zhejiang became the most important salt industry center during the war. In 1938, the Japanese army carried out over 400 sorties, savagely bombing Zhejiang. Zhejiang was neither a strategic point nor a military stronghold, so the sole purpose of the Japanese was to cut off China's salt supply. Cutting off the salt supply could provoke war weariness. It was Japan's salt blockade against China. When the Japanese bombers came, the salt workers did not rush to escape. Rather, they extinguished the stove fire and covered the wells when the alarm sounded, then went to nearby shelters. And those who boiled the brine, even when the bombing was going on, did not stop working. The workers made salt with their blood, sweat, and tears. During the 8 years of the war, salt output in Zhejiang did not decrease, but instead increased. Zhejiang supplied almost 1/3 of the population with salt. Taxes from Zhejiang supported the precarious finance of the wartime government. The salt workers even donated money to buy 2 planes to support resistance against the aggression. Salt, a crucial resource both sides of war fought over, ignited patriotism among the people and defended the integrity of the country. However, human history is cyclical. Today, this struggle continues in another form. Here is the largest non-icy white surface on Earth. Located in Bolivia, South America, Salar de Uyuni is dubbed Mirror of the Sky. There is so much salt here, the locals even use salt to build houses. Now, it has proven to be the goose that lays the golden eggs. The incalculable real value of Uyuni is the lithium, hidden beneath the salty crust. It accounts for 40% of global lithium reserves. Today, in order to manufacture electric vehicle batteries, mobile phone batteries, etc., the demand for lithium resources has skyrocketed. People all over the world are focusing on this huge, untapped treasure. In order to obtain mining rights here, South Korea, Japan, France, China, and Brazil engaged in fierce competition. They proposed large-scale investment plans one after another. Everyone knows that, in order to establish dominance in the lithium battery market in the future, it is necessary to ensure a stable supply of the raw materials. In the past, salt helped draw national boundaries. Today, people are fighting for the right to extract resources from this salt lake. These invisible national boundaries will once again be redrawn.